Well, good morning, everyone. It's just gone 9 o'clock, so we'll open the proceedings and welcome to the hearing of the applications by Tenex Group Limited, and we're going to commence this morning with a karakia. And thank you very much for that, James. My name is Rob Van Voorthausen. I'm an Independent Hearings Commissioner based in Napier.
Kia ora tātou, can you hear me? I see we've got both on, that's all. James, how about now? Ka pai. James Whetu, born and raised in Tokoroa. I'm living in Ngaruwa Wahia, so I live on the other side of the Kaimai Ranges. Your background is planning, so I'm the Commissioner here to support Rob. Kia ora.
Right, thank you very much for that. For those of you who either are here this morning or are watching the live stream and you haven't been to a hearing before, I'll just run through the general process, and then we'll have some health and safety briefings from the council staff, and after that I'll ask the council team to introduce themselves to the hearing. And Mr. Gardner-Hopkins, if you can introduce your team once we hand over to you to present your case, if that's okay. So the normal process is that we'll hear first of all from the applicant and their witnesses. We then hear from submitters, and the District Council has prepared a schedule which is available on the webpage if you don't already have a copy of that. We then hear from the reporting team, the council reporting officers, and then the final part of the process is the applicant has what's called a right of reply. James and I will be doing a site visit tomorrow morning. We'll be accompanied by the reporting officer and a planner who works with the applicant. They're the only parties who will accompany us, and then we'll recommence the hearing tomorrow afternoon after that. So, should we have the health and safety briefing now?
Kia ora koutou, I'm Natasha Ryburn, the Environmental Consents Manager here at Council. Just a few housekeeping matters. In the event of an emergency, please follow staff, and we'll be going out the way that you came in through the building, and the assembly point is out in the main staff car park area. There are toilets as you came in through reception, just on your right there before the coffee and tea station. A reminder that this hearing is being live streamed. Please make sure your cell phones are turned to silent, and if you're presenting today, please make sure your microphones are on and close to you. The button on the right is the one that you need to use to turn it on and off. We're here to help. If you've got any documentation that you haven't already shared, staff can make copies and circulate those during the hearing to participants. So I think that's all. Thank you.
Excellent, thank you. So let's introduce the council team. Why don't we just start on my left and work our way towards the back.
Good morning, my name is Heather Perrine. I'm a consultant planner who's been contracted by Western Bay to report on this application.
Good morning, my name is Justine Wilton. I am a council contractor and their transportation expert.
You know me. I'm Nancy Butler, and I'm coordinating the day, and so if anybody needs anything, just yell out. Yeah.
I'm Sam Kay. I'm a consent officer, and I'm just here to support the team.
Right, thank you very much for that. So Nancy, if you'd want to stand up just so everyone can clearly see you. Nancy is very important. So if there's any administrative issues that you want to have questions answered or talk about the process or how it's going to work or how the schedule's been set and when you might appear, if you're here in person today, come and see Nancy. And if you're not here in person, I'm sure you can contact her over the telephone. All right, so just before I hand over to the applicant from the reporting team, any procedural issues to draw to our attention this morning before we hear from the applicant?
Yes, Chair. We've had from Piriraku Hapu, they've changed their stance from support to neutral and requested to be heard tomorrow. So we're just in the process of scheduling that presentation for just after afternoon tea tomorrow, so around 3:20.
All right, thank you very much for that. So Mr. Gardner-Hopkins, hand over to you now. Just before I do so, just thank you to yourself and your team for pre-circulating your written evidence. That's been helpful. So I can assure you that both commissioners have read that evidence very carefully and in full. So as per our minute, we don't wish to have that evidence reread to us out loud because that would be a waste of everyone's time, including yours and ours. But of course, yourself and your other witnesses are very welcome to highlight key points for us, should they wish to do so. And obviously, if there's new material, for example, stormwater quality results, etc., then obviously you'll need to present that to us. And if you have extra written material to table today, then table that, and we'd like anything new that we haven't already read just read out to us in full. And so witnesses, like I said, are welcome to highlight key points, or if they so wish to do so, we can just proceed straight to questions, but we'll leave that in your hands.
Thank you. And look, I may stand when I'm giving my sort of representations, but just in terms of the housekeeping, just introducing the team that is here. To my left is Mr. Cosson, who is the applicant's planner, independent planner. To my right is Barry and Beth Daniels, the applicant. And then furthest along is Mr. Harrison, independent traffic engineer. We probably do have some people joining or watching. Just in terms of one housekeeping matter, we do have Mr. Joins attending from overseas. And so ideally, we would get him on sooner rather than later. He is watching, I think.
Yep.
He is happy to wait until I've given the representations to set the scene. But yeah, look, it would be ideal if he could be heard immediately after me, or if I'm taking too long, we could pause to ensure that he gets heard at a good time, given his time zone.
Yeah, that's absolutely fine. We can hear Mr. Joins whenever it's convenient to himself and you. And if you're taking too long, don't worry, I'll let you know about that.
Thank you. Well, on that note, I'll, unless there's any other preliminary matters, I'll stand to give the representations. Look, I'm conscious this material has been pre-circulated, so I won't intend to read it out. But I do think there are a number of important matters in terms of the context and the framework that would be helpful to take you through. So look, I don't think I need to go through the first couple of points, but if we turn to page 2 of the representations, I do make a couple of important points here. I'm sure will be well known to the commissioners. This is not a numbers game in terms of submissions. And the critical issues in terms of the applicant's position are the effects and a fair appraisal against the objectives and policies as a whole. And if that is the primary focus, then the position is that a lot of the other matters then fall away. Issues of plan integrity and precedent don't arise because essentially of the effects, which the applicant says are minor or less. and because actually carefully assessed against the objectives and policies as a whole, the application is not contrary to them. And if you reach both of those findings, then I say integrity and the like issues fall away. The other issue, which has caused a bit of noise, if you like, in terms of this application, is the fact that it does relate to activities that are currently unauthorised. And the applicant does accept that is the position, but it says essentially that that status is irrelevant for the purpose of this hearing. This is about whether or not consent should be granted, and it is not about abatement or some sort of penalty for the original establishment of those activities. And so some of the history is addressed in the applicant's evidence. That is in part for context, but also responding to matters that the council or the submitters may have raised. But the position really is that that's, if you like, noise around the edges, and it doesn't need a close examination by you today. And of course, as I think the commissioners will be well aware, there are separate enforcement proceedings, or in terms of abatement notice proceedings, that are dealing with the original establishment. So I think that deals mostly with my page 2. Page 3, really just a bit of context there, and I think if you've read the materials, it will be clear that this application relates to a small portion of the wider site, which we do say is relatively small in area and relatively small in terms of the number of activities. There are 4 tenancies, and this consent relates specifically to those tenancies. It's not intended to be some sort of stalking horse to allow additional tenancies to substitute. And I do need to be very clear that this is intended to be a temporary consent only for a 2-year period, while wider consent applications are being pursued. And so I do say that that combination of factors is also another reason that this application isn't significant from a precedent or plan integrity perspective because of its narrow focus and temporary duration in time. There are some, again, wider issues about the extent of earthworks across the site as a whole. The applicant's position is in respect of where the current activities are located. There is no debate that those earthworks to establish essentially the site for them to develop were lawfully undertaken. And quite a lot more in terms of earthworks across the site was lawful. There are some that were not consented, if you like, because the original regional consent was surrendered. The submission for the applicant in terms of these proceedings is that any issues relating to those wider earthworks and their consequences for stormwater in particular are separate matters that don't fall within the scope of the effects of these activities. My paragraph 9, and I don't think we need to get into it, but I do record there may be actually an argument that the earthworks that continued after the surrender of the regional council consent were in fact subject to existing use rights because they met the permitted activity standards of the regional plan at the time, and they were continued in line with what was lawfully undertaken as a permitted activity. But as I say, that's probably irrelevant. Page 5 is really just the roadmap. I don't need to go through that. And page 6, these matters will be very familiar, I'm sure, to the commissioners. Excuse me, I won't go through certainly A and B, other to note that in terms of the section 104 considerations, my numbering of the subparagraphs is slightly out. That's because the second item is subparagraph A, B, not subparagraph B. I do address part 2 briefly, and I suppose I do consider that this is a case where part 2 is relevant for your decision making. Certainly, I think the authorities are now reasonably clear that you can have access to part 2, and it really is a question of whether or not it adds anything more to the assessment and the evaluative process. And I suppose just pausing there, in terms of the particular part 2 matters, the applicant would emphasise the enabling aspects of section 5 in terms of people and communities, and that does include the business community, and that does include the tenants, their employees, and those associated with the activities that this consent will allow to continue. And also, I think it's section 7B, the efficient use of resources. Turning briefly to the environment, and I don't think I need to labour this point, but what these representations are highlighting here is the need to look at the zoning context and what this land is intended to be used for as an important factor in understanding what the environment is. Jumping to page 8, no more than minor adverse effects. I've recorded there a number of the authorities in terms of giving guidance as to what minor is. The paragraph 20, and I will emphasise this, something that is so limited that it is objectively acceptable and reasonable in the receiving environment and to potentially affected persons. And I do emphasise there the objective element, and that really is part of your task, is to identify what is objectively reasonable here. And so the subjective views of particular submitters may need to be treated with some caution. Paragraph 21, really just again some indicators from the authorities in terms of what minor is: relatively small, comparatively small, and the need to make that determination in context. And as I've said, that's the context of the existing zone. The next section, evidence and the principles for evidence. Again, I don't think I need to take the commissioners through the detail of that. I suppose just pausing at paragraph 24 in terms of opinion evidence as opposed to evidence of fact that may be given by non-experts. Just again, a note of caution, not suggesting that anything is inadmissible, but sort of non-expert opinion needs to be treated with caution. And of course, evidence should be focused on the matters at issue, which again I emphasise are very much the effects of these 4 activities, not what may have occurred in the past or across the wider site. List the experts at 26. As I understand it, the commissioners had no questions for Mr. Stiles. So he is off the hook for now at least. And I think you will hear from all the others listed there during the course of the day today. So look, my preference is to let the evidence speak for itself and to let you hear directly from the witnesses. So I've attempted to capture some of the key elements in these representations, but I don't intend to take you through the detail there. I suppose just in terms of stormwater and my paragraph 31, in terms of what the modelling suggests, and you will hear soon direct from Mr. Joins, I've done the maths at paragraphs A and B in terms of the percentage increases. And I don't say that should be the start and the finish of any consideration, but we are talking about very, very small impacts. And paragraph 32, I do note that the most affected neighbour, Mr. Phillips, has given written approval. I think that was attached to the evidence of Mr. Crossan. And Mr. Crossan will update in terms of the water quality matters. And I think the sampling results were pre-circulated at the end of last week. And so I don't think that's needing to be tabled today, but it should be available to the commissioners. I won't talk about noise, landscape and visual effects, and we will have Mr. May here to appear in front of you. As I understand the remaining points of difference between the landscape experts, it seems to be just one or two matters only. And one is in terms of if there is to be additional mitigation of the compass pools, then it's the height of any shade cloth to be erected, and whether that should be 4 metres or 6.5, and also the extent of the area of shading, should it be just the two main sides or the entirety of that tenancy. And then the other issue does seem to be more about the maintenance of some additional planting and how it should be protected. Traffic, again, you will hear from Mr. Harrison on this, and I think he has a short one-page summary to read out, but certainly as I understand it, one of the key issues is the Te Puna Station Road intersection. There is perhaps something of another side issue there in terms of whether or not the upgrade anticipated in the district plan has or hasn't been undertaken already. And some of the background to that is some exchanges between the council and the applicant, indicating that those works had been undertaken. And also, and that's touched on in the evidence of Mr. Daniel. And then there is also this memorandum of understanding between the council and the three owners of the business park, which also states that those works have been undertaken. Now, as I understand it, the council says they weren't, and so it was mistaken when it made those representations. It may not be an issue that you need to resolve in terms of who was right or who was wrong historically, but it may be relevant to your assessment both of the effects, but probably more relevant to any policy considerations in terms of should those works be undertaken before any activities occur? Is that what the plan anticipated? And what are the effects of essentially allowing these activities without those upgrade works? And so understanding what those upgrade works were supposed to be, you may need to confront that issue. The applicant, I think, says you can avoid that if you do prefer the evidence of Mr. Harrison in terms of effects of this application. And so he says, because of the small number of vehicles and because he has been out and he's measured the sight lines for that particular intersection and its approach, that whilst they don't meet the standards, they are still safe. And so if you prefer that evidence, then you may not need to resolve the question of whether or not the plan intended something more to be done at that intersection and the policy consequences if that hasn't occurred. There is still a debate about works for the site entrance itself. This is essentially boils down to whether or not the road should be widened opposite the entrance to the site or not. But again, Mr. Harrison has been on site, has reviewed the site distances, and again, his view is that it is safe, bearing that in mind, and again, the low number of trips generated. And I'll call it a relatively minor issue about the sealing of the site. Additional sealing is proposed so that there is less likelihood of material being tracked out and onto the road. And the last point there in terms of the use of Clark Road, the tenants in their written statements have each indicated that they think they can comply with the requirement to avoid heavy vehicles using Clark Road. And that's either because they deliver or transport their various materials themselves, or they have a small number of contractors that do so, and so they think that they can meet that condition. So to cultural effects, and I have to accept that the landscape here has shifted perhaps a little. And I think we will need to hear what Pururakau Tribal Authority does say through a representative to you tomorrow. But I guess what I would say at the moment is, again, focusing on these activities, the effects are limited, and the cultural effects as a consequence, in my view, could be considered limited. But also a neutral stance does not count against the proposal. It's obviously not different to a supportive stance, but it's not in opposition. And the applicant had offered a number of conditions to address some of the cultural matters. Some of them, I think, technically on an OGIA type basis. They are still offered nonetheless. So it's also the applicant's position that the grant of this consent will have positive effects. So if we get through the 104D gateway, these are then matters that you can take into account. And this does include, in a very real sense, generating some funding that can be put into completion of the wider structure plan requirements. It also obviously includes, for the particular tenancies, the positive effects that they are able to provide in terms of employment and providing for their families. So briefly, objectives and policies. The principles there are long-standing, that contrary to is quite a high threshold. It's repugnant and antagonistic. And so the position is that inconsistent isn't enough to get to failing that particular gateway, and that it is the objectives and policies fairly considered as a whole, and most recently confirmed in the Court of Appeal R.J. Davidson case. Precedent and integrity, related or many times similar concepts. My paragraph 56, and this is what I alluded to at the outset, the quote there, a reasoned decision which held that a particular non-complying proposal was not contrary to district plan objectives and policies, could not be criticised for legal error simply on the basis that it omitted reference to district plan coherence, integrity, public confidence, or even precedent. So all those elements, I say, are related. And I do say, if you have a reasoned decision that finds that this non-complying activity is not contrary to the district plan objectives and policies, then questions of integrity, coherence, precedent, essentially all disappear. And I think the summary at paragraph 59, A through C on my last page, I think I've addressed you on those issues already and don't need to do so again. Likewise with part 2. So look, hopefully I haven't raced through that too quickly. You may have some questions. I'm certainly happy to take them before moving on.
Yep, thank you very much for that. Just a sec. So just in terms of the stormwater water quality results, neither James nor myself have received that information.
Okay, so we can make sure that that is available to you perhaps at the first break.
Yes.
And certainly Mr. Crossan will be able to talk to what they mean.
Great. So Nancy, maybe you could, if it's available in your system, you could just email it to us. You done that? Okay, great. Thanks. So James, any questions?
Make sure I got the speaker on. Good evening, Mr. Gordon Hopkins. Thank you for that. I do have a question, and it may lead on to other questions, because I guess, as you could appreciate, there's quite a bit happening with let's call it the development as a whole. And I guess I'm just seeking some clarity first. In regards to your role as project manager, is it the whole thing, or is it just this particular matter here that's before us?
So it's the set of resource consent applications I've been contracted as project manager on. So probably because this has been a focal point, I know more about this particular application, but I have been working with Mr. Crossan on the 2 other consent applications, but on some matters of detail, I might defer to him.
Okay, Kaupai, thank you for that. Then I'll just leave my questions for the other members of your team. Thanks for that.
Right, I've just got a couple of matters, and just for ease of reference, I'll just refer to the paragraph numbers in your representations. And the first one is on page 6, paragraph 12C, and the question is part 2 relevant to our section 104D assessment?
It's a vexed question. My answer is yes, in the sense that the purpose of the Act and its principles, like the purpose of any Act, is relevant for the interpretation and application of each of its provisions. And I suppose I say that in terms of the purpose of the Section 104D assessment must be in support of achieving the purpose of the Act. And I do say that's, I would say that's why some of the tests in terms of what does contrary to mean have been set at the level that they have been, and also the authorities on effects, because it would not accord with the purpose of the Act if Section 104D were to cut things off at the pass too easily, because it would then prevent activities that would achieve the purpose of the Act.
Right. Is that primarily a Section 5 consideration rather than 6, 7, 8?
Yes.
And so when we hear from the council officers, I'd appreciate council's view on that, because I've had different interpretations given to me at other hearings. Some say this and some say, no, it's not relevant because it's not referred to in 104D directly. So the council position on that would be interesting. Paragraph 40.
Sorry, 40?
Yeah, 40, sorry. Yep. And so just in terms of the intersection of Tapuna Station Road and Tapuna Road and whether or not it was upgraded by the council in accordance with the structure plan, in terms of our effects assessment, I'm struggling to see how that's at all relevant. The intersection is what it is. Their traffic effects have been spelt out in the evidence of both witnesses for yourself and the council. And as I understand it, the applicant's offering mitigation in terms of moving the painted traffic island. So in my mind, the issue for us is, in light of the evidence, are the traffic safety effects with that mitigation in place minor or more than minor, and whether or not it's been upgraded in accordance with the structure plan isn't really relevant in terms of effects assessments, is it?
Yes, I would agree with that. And so as I think I tried to say, whether or not it's been upgraded in accordance with the structure plan's intentions might be relevant for the objectives and policies question. Sure. But not the effects question.
Yeah, good. And just turning to that mitigation, of course, the applicant can't go out and change the location of a traffic island. That mitigation would rely on the council doing that. And so in terms of us, if we were to grant approval conditioning that, we can't, can we? We can't condition a third party. So how's that going to work from the applicant's perspective? Yes. The mitigation you're offering can't be imposed by us by way of condition.
Yes, my understanding is that the council, if that were, let's say, imposed for now as a condition of consent, would facilitate the undertaking of those works. And it might be helpful to have that clarified.
Yeah.
The requirement to do something that requires third-party input, I would say is not ultra vires a condition. Partly it depends on how it's phrased. And if there was an issue about whether or not it could be implemented, the condition could be rephrased so that the applicant is required to make the offer and make the funding available for those works to occur. But it would be then contingent on the council allowing that to occur.
All right, so obviously that's an issue that will require clarification from the reporting team when we come to hear from you later in the week. And just on a similar vein, and I would normally put this to Mr. Crossan, but again, it's a legal, it's a matter of legal interpretation, so I'd be interested in your view on that. Conditions 10, B and C in Mr. Crossan's evidence, if you can quickly turn to that, or if you can show them to you.
I have them, the conditions as modified?
Yeah,
by
so
Mr.
it's with the
Crossan?
strikeout, the blue
Yes.
and red strikeout. Yeah, so it's a similar question. B and C, the conditions purport to bind the tenants. Of course, the tenants aren't the consent holders, so maybe yourself and Mr. Crossan might reflect on how those conditions could be reworded to impose an actual enforceable obligation on the consent holder rather than the tenants.
Yes, and I think Mr. Daniel may be able to comment in terms of his discussions or ability to work with the tenants to ensure that that happens.
Yeah, I'm not worried about that. I'm just worried about a condition that's actually enforceable on the consent holder.
Yes. Well, look, and again, it may be a matter of refining the wording to ensure that it's very clear who the obligation rests on.
Yes, that's right. Yeah. And just one last question for you. And it's your paragraphs 49 and 50 and the implications if the consents are declined. And you say in paragraph 50 that the structures and facilities could remain dormant on site. I'm just wondering if that's quite right though, is it? If we were to decline consent and therefore the activities and the structures and everything that's occurred on site other than the earthworks would remain unauthorised, then my understanding is that any party, not just the council, but any party, an individual could seek an enforcement order from the Environment Court to have all of that stuff removed. So it's not necessarily just going to lie there dormant, isn't it? If someone's motivated to seek an enforcement order, then it could be removed.
I would accept that, subject to it would need a further process.
Of course, yeah, it's going to require an enforcement order process, which is neither cheap nor quick. Right, okay, thank you. So they're all the questions I had from you, for you. So James, any other follow-up questions for Mr. Gardiner-Hopkins? No? So if you have Mr. Joins ready and willing to go, we can hear from him now if that suits.
I think he has been watching, so hopefully we have the technology to bring him to life on the screen. He's not on yet? The alternative is we could move to Mr. Daniel.
We found Mr. Joins' evidence to be both brief and straightforward, and as a result, it's clear to us, and I don't have questions of clarification, and nor does my colleague. So if we're having trouble getting Mr. Joins on, you could just let him know that at this stage we don't need to hear from them unless there was anything additional he wished to say to us.
I don't think so. He was really just going to confirm his evidence and be ready to answer any questions.
Yeah, no, look, I think that's fine. As you said in your representations, the modelling results show that the increase in flooding is very small, and in any case, the affected landowners provided written approval, which takes those effects out of play anyway. So I think we can excuse Mr. Joins.
Excellent. I will just quickly let him know, and then
Yes.
we can move to Mr. Daniel.
Yes, that'd be great. Thank you.
So, Mr. Daniel, your evidence has been read. You are welcome to make some additional sort of comments or emphasise anything you wish, and then otherwise answer any questions the panel has.
Hello, I'm Barry Daniel, the applicant. Just want to point out that we're sort of trying to go full steam ahead and get our overall consent. And just that we've been served this abatement notice, which has put put a hold on us doing anything to, at all on the site. So, but the applications with the council for the main consent, James is sorting that out. You'll fill you in on that, but we're trying to be compliant as we can going forward. As we weren't all that familiar with the process going forward. It was originally rezoned in 2005, but we were held up with the roundabout on State Highway to Te Puna Road, and it wasn't until that got implemented that we could move forward. Not a few health issues, and that sort of put a bit of a spanner in the works, and now we're away again. I don't know what else I can say. Ask me questions and I'll try and fill you in.
All right, thank you very much for that, Daniels. We'll see if we have questions for you.
Kia ora, Mr. Daniels, thank you very much for that. Hey, I guess I can appreciate that I guess from my point of view, quite a bit of history here, and you talk about a bit of a progression. When you can fit it in, you'll do a bit of works here, a bit of works here. I was wondering if we can use a bit of that time, just I guess take me through that journey.
What was that?
Take me through the journey, because obviously there's a lot of requirements that sort of sit, prerequisite stuff that sort of sits within the Te Puna structure plan.
Yep.
Planting being one of them, and I guess I'm trying to understand how you've approached it over that time frame and then where we are to today, because bearing in mind we could say it's taken 20 years to be here.
Yeah.
And so on that viewpoint, I guess I'm trying to get a bit of a gauge from your enabling of the Te Puna structure plan over that period of time. So from when you started thinking about planting, when you started thinking about those measures that sat within there, obviously you pursued a resource consent to do initially some earthworks prior to where the other stuff started popping in around 2012.
Yeah.
So again, if you can just, how you can just freely speak about that stuff, that would be nice.
Well, we started filling in about 2003 or 4, I think it was, and we obtained a resource consent from the regional council to fill, a fill consent. And we started pulling at the southern end. And so, because we built the whole site up about 2.5 metres. So as you can appreciate, there was a bit of fill coming in. It happened over a number of years, but the officer that was looking after our thing with the regional council, he said, well, you're not, permitted activities 5,000 cube a year, and at that stage we weren't doing it. They were coming out every 3 months and inspecting it, and everything was all right. We had all our retention ponds, and was what they call a safe site. So he suggested we surrender the consent, and then we wouldn't require them coming out all the time, but they'd be keeping an eye on it. So we surrendered that, but in 2000, well, as I've found out since we've applied for our consent to actually instigate the industrial, that we didn't have a consent from the Western Bay Council. In 2012, they changed the district plan and rezoned it, whatever it was, to a flood zone. But even though the district council knew that we were filling it, they didn't let us know or anything. We were supposed to get the district plan. Well, at that stage I could hardly turn a computer on, let alone wade through the district plan. Probably didn't even know what the district plan was then. yes, as we've filled and we've got the bund along the front, I think in the scheme plan we're only to have the bund around the southern boundary and a little bit up the back and well, about 50 metres along the Te Puna Station Road. So we put the bunding right along to try and get a bit of screening. And then not long after that, we planted it in about 2019 or something. Plantings have been in about coming up 4 years now. With consultation with Periakau, and the scheme plan said that we'd have exotic trees in there, but with consultation with Periakau, they didn't want a bar of that. They just wanted all natives, which I was happy with that. We were approached by AJ Demolition to store some the school classrooms in about 2016, and they went in, then we obtained, they wanted them in over the Christmas period. I gave them permission to get in and then obtained permission from Western Bay to have them there, which we were granted. And in about 2019, there was Total Relocations wanted to store the Bella Vista houses, which was a failed subdivision up at Tauriko. And we stored them, and it just sort of progressed from there. We obtained permission from the council for them. And at that stage, so the hold-up was the Clark Road traffic calming. So, and that was underway. We'd got consensus between the three landowners, the industrial landowners. We had an arrangement with the council. We paid the money and the council done the work on the road. So that was done, and that, we presume, unlocked the sort of industrial area. And we were, the idea was to progress it forward from there. Not long after that, we were banged with abatement notice. The rest is history, really.
Start again. No, thank you for that, Mr. Daniels. I guess hearing it, because there's lots written, so I guess the opportunity here was to hear it from you. And I'm very mindful. I guess what I'm trying to take into account is the journey you obviously been going through to get to this point here, recognising the process that everyone refers to around the Environment Court decision and now to here. And I guess I'm just trying to get a gauge, hearing it from you rather than reading it. So
I've got
I appreciate that.
Written thing there of all consultants we've used over the last, since 2019, the chain of events from there. If you're wanting a copy of that.
Oh, no, that's right. I could probably acknowledge that. Thanks for that, though. But I have no further questions for you, so thank you.
So, Mr. Daniel, just just a couple of questions from me. I'm just interested in your paragraph 6, and you might have just referred to it, that you had experts advising you. So I'm just curious to know who those experts were and when they were engaged. So with the project manager, who was that?
Shay Crosland, he came on about 2019.
Okay. Yeah.
Prior to that, I was in reasonably constant communication with Philip Martelli from the Western Bay.
Yeah.
He went through the Environment Court with us. He was representing Western Bay.
Mm-hmm.
So we're in regular contact with him, what we should be doing and shouldn't be doing. So he was advising us sort of the process right through.
Yeah.
Probably in hindsight, his depth of advice wasn't enough.
And who was your lawyer and when were they engaged?
The current lawyers,
I just referring to your paragraph 6, you said the landowners had a project manager, a lawyer. Who was the lawyer and when were they engaged?
Lara Burkhardt, hang on,
I just wonder, so we do have clarity on what Mr. Daniel is answering. But if you could just look at your paragraph 6, and it's perhaps not even clear to me whether you're talking about sort of the team at the time of the Environment Court rezoning, or if you're talking more recently about who's been helping with the resource consents and the abatement notice issues.
Oh, yeah. Well, the rezoning, we had the lawyers with the rezoning thing, that was back in, well, the decision come out in 2005. It was in, I think the Environment Court was about 2004 or something. And that was, if you want to know who the name was?
I guess what I'm interested in is just to get an understanding of the advisors that you were relying on that's led you to be in the position that you're now in, where you're faced with unauthorised activities having occurred on the site. So when you wrote your paragraph 6, were you referring to the structure plan process or the rezoning back in 2004-5, or were you referring to more recent events that have led us to where we are today?
I was more referring to the rezoning in 2005 there.
Okay. So in terms of advice that you've received, say, sort of 2019 onwards, who would that have been from? So you mentioned Mr. Crossan, so he was your project manager until 2019?
Yeah.
And
prior to that, I was sort of relying on Philip Martelli.
yeah, he works for the council,
Yeah,
but
the
who else?
council.
So say 2019 onwards, who else was advising you?
The original planner was Lynn Sims, but she, she's moved down to Alexandra. The Tiaki Engineering, Stratum Consultant, Styles.
So you've got something, maybe we could just get a copy of what you're reading out. Would that
Yeah,
be,
we can have
that
that.
would say,
Yeah.
trying to interpret it for us. And then if we have any questions arising from that, we can come back to it at some stage. All right, so thanks for that. And just a very simple question, where do you live?
On site at Tupuna Station Road.
So is your property, if I'm looking at an aerial photograph of the site?
Yeah, the house is on the end,
Okay.
245.
So your property is, so we have the activities, the swimming pools and the relocatable houses, then an area of open land, and then there's a little cluster of buildings. Is that where you
Yep,
live?
yep.
Okay. All right, thanks for that. And no further questions from me. Thank you.
Right.
Thank you. I just note I might invite Mr. Crossan, just when the time comes, just to clarify the extent of his involvement, what he recalls about the team sort of from 2019 onwards,
Yeah.
just so that there is some clarity
Yeah, so-
around that.
Do you need a copy of this to help with that?
I think I've got a pretty good recollection in my mind, but perhaps if everyone could, maybe at the morning tea break, just circulate a copy.
Oh.
Sorry, I was just saying what Mr. Daniels has just handed Mr. von Voorthausen in terms of the timelines. If we could get a copy of that printed and circulated, I can speak to that later on.
Yeah, look, it's not a crucial point. I'm just curious in terms of the position we find ourselves in now with the retrospective consent. Obviously, just curious to know what advice was given to the applicant on the way through that's led to where we are now.
Thank you. So I'll invite Mr. Harrison to give his evidence. I think he does have a short,
Yep, that's fine,
just a
absolutely
summary
fine.
to present.
Great. Thank you very much and good morning.
Mr. Harrison, do we have a copy of that summary?
No, I've only got the one.
Yeah, well, we're going to have to pause while we get that
Written all over.
photocopied, eh? So if you're going to read anything out, if you're going to read out something new to us that we haven't seen before, we need a copy of it in front of us.
Yeah, sorry, it's not actually new. It's just prompt notes for me to, about, just to make it easier for me as I go through and give you a summary of what's in my evidence.
So it's not a new statement, it's just your speaking notes
Yes.
from your pre-circulated evidence?
Yes, that's
Okay.
correct.
Notwithstanding, would it help us understand what you're going to say if we had a copy of that in front of us, or is that not necessary, do you think?
It could well do.
Yeah, so should we pause while we get that?
Yeah,
Just
I'm
two
happy for
copies
that.
made for James and I?
Yeah, I'm happy for that. Yes.
Okay.
Thank you. Just in terms of housekeeping whilst we wait, we are proceeding a little quicker than I think I'd anticipated.
Yes, that's the way of things these days with pre-circulation.
Yes. So I can confirm I have asked Mr. May to join us at the morning tea break. And I think Mr. Boss was intending to come at that time anyway. So look, we should be able to proceed relatively seamlessly after morning tea as well.
Yeah, that's good, thank you. All right, Mr. Harrison, thank you for providing that. So carry on.
Right. Thank you. Well, okay. Not sure what happened there.
Yeah, I did it too at some stage. We'll just carry on.
Okay, so just starting off, this is basically just summarising my evidence. Paragraph 14, just like to highlight the existing daily traffic generation is approximately 25 vehicles per day, with a peak of 2 to 3 vehicles per hour. and that's a very low level of traffic, on average about one vehicle movement every 20 to 30 minutes. I just point out that's
So sorry, Mr. Harrison, can you just maybe pull the microphone towards yourself? Yeah, just slide the whole unit. It should slide. Yeah, there we go. And just speak up a little bit. Thanks.
okay. So it's a very low level of traffic generation, on average one vehicle movement every 20 to 30 minutes, which is less than the typical variation in traffic volumes from hour to hour or from day to day. Looking at the intersection of Te Puna Road and Te Puna Station Road, paragraphs 15 to 23 discuss the district plan requirements for the intersection and the uncertainty of whether the plan requires the provision of a right turn bay on Te Puna Road or not. On paragraph 24, irrespective of that discussion, given the current volumes, a right turn bay is warranted, and this is regardless of the traffic associated with the site. Paragraph 27. I've had a preliminary look at what would be required to provide a right turn bay, and it would be a significant undertaking. The constraints include the width of the road reserve, the likelihood of additional land being required, and also the width of the railway overbridge, which is located north of the intersection. And then in paragraph 34, given the very low level of traffic generation and the short time frame of the proposed consent, I consider the traffic associated with the site will have very little effect at the intersection. Turning to the site access to Te Puna Station Road, paragraphs 36 to 48 discuss the various design standards for the access. Paragraph 38, which I've just written in there by hand, I didn't previously have a copy of the old version of the planning policy manual that was current when the industrial zoning was approved. Mrs. Wilton has just given me a copy of that this morning, so I'd just like to confirm that the diagram D referred to in the structure plan is the current diagram E. Paragraph 44. In my view, the Waka Kotahi diagram D treatment is appropriate, but without the road widening opposite the access. The diagram D provides 1 to 10 tapers or splays on the entry and exit curves. Sorry, that's a higher standard than the equivalent diagram A of the development code, and it better accommodates the tracking of trucks turning left in and left out of the site. Paragraphs 49 to 52 discuss the road widening opposite the access. With the recent closure of Te Puna Station Road due to a slip and the uncertainty over any reopening of the road, there are essentially two scenarios. If Te Puna Station Road remains closed in both directions, then the through traffic volumes along the road will be very low, although there will still be some eastbound traffic associated with the Clark Road rat run. As the westbound traffic volumes will be very low, any delay to a vehicle turning right into the site will also be very low, and so any risk to a following vehicle will be very low. If Te Puna Station Road is opened to eastbound traffic, there will be obviously an increase in eastbound traffic volumes. However, I expect the westbound traffic volumes will still remain very low, and so any delay to a vehicle turning right into the site will remain very low. So again, any risk to a following vehicle will be very low. So in my view, under either scenario, the widening is not required. Paragraph 53 to 54, regarding the sealing of the vehicle entrance. It is proposed that the entrance be sealed. To address any tracking of detritus onto the road, I've recommended that the internal driveway be sealed for a distance of 30 metres from the edge of the carriageway. The use of Clark Road, which is paragraphs 55 to 56. I support the proposed conditions to discourage vehicles from using Clark Road and State Highway 2 underpass. And then heavy vehicles using Te Puna Station Road, paragraphs 57 to 59. Given the very low traffic generation, I consider the existing Te Puna Station Road carriageway is adequate to accommodate the heavy vehicles associated with the site.
Thank you for that summary. You happy to take questions now?
Yes, that's
Right.
fine.
James, any questions, Mr. Harrison?
Kia ora, Mr. Harrison. If you can take me through your thoughts around if there is if there's a difference in your mind between right turn movements and a right turn bay, if you can help me understand it. I'm not a traffic engineer, and so I'm just trying to understand your view on that interpretation between right turn and then there's right turn movements, right turn bay. If you can give me some clarity or help me understand it, a layperson in that particular matter.
The right turn movements is the number of vehicles that are turning right at the intersection. When we go through our designing of intersections, we refer to Australian guidelines known as the Austroads Guide to Road Design. And in there they have recommendations for how to design the intersections. And they have a warrant criteria for the installation of a right turn bay, which is the paint markings that are on the road to accommodate those right turn movements. And so we tend to refer to those warrant criteria quite a lot. But to install the right turn bay, you need to widen the traffic lane, widen the carriageway by the width of the additional traffic lane. So it's a, well, you need the width of the road, you need the sufficient road reserve to be able to accommodate that right turn bay.
So, with a right turn bay, is there greater certainty around safety,
Yes.
road user safety and traffic movements? So
Yes.
there's a greater certainty of safety. Okay.
Yes.
Second. If I can just digress a little bit, because you referred to the Australian manual or Australian framework. Apologies for lack of
Austroads
understanding.
guides.
Yeah. Because there is reference to diagram D, and I think
Yes.
you pointed out that you pointed out that there's potential for referencing to other potential documents out there. So I guess just for clarity, when you say in your mind diagram D, that's with Waka Kotahi's
Yes.
layout plan.
Yes. Which is what the structure plan refers to. Yeah.
And just to clarify, and so the evidence you're presenting to us today, is before us, specifically focuses on the application as it is, not necessarily the wider opening of stage 1 of the structure plan.
Yes, that's correct.
Have you been part of any of the traffic assessments as part of the wider stage 1 opening, or yes? Okay.
Yes.
So
I have.
there's a consistency with
Yes.
that. Okay. Forgive me, I have to just write it down to make sure I remember this. I don't know if I want to go there. I'll just go there. This is with respect to the memorandum of understanding around what's been achieved or what was previous works done and what they looked like and how it responded back to the district plan and those respective provisions that sit within it. And when I was reading it, gosh, I can't find it right now, but it talks about obviously right, left-hand movements, and then similar alternatives, I guess, was the other parts. They sort of had an or, I guess, they sat within that provision. Give me a second and see if I can find it.
Yeah, no, that's correct. I do remember that in there, yes.
And I guess I'm just interested, noting that we are going through, what's the word I'm looking for? One, temporary in terms of a consent application process, but I guess the other part being only a part of the whole unlocking of stage one. And I guess I'm trying to find an understanding around, that provision has, it talks about right turn, left turn, or similar alternatives. And like, if you can talk a little bit more around your assessment, I guess, in that other part around or similar alternatives, just to give me a bit of context or your expertise in that kind of similar alternatives.
Right, I wasn't involved in that part of the plan change back in 2004, 2005. So I can only guess what they were referring to, but I expect they may have been referring to perhaps the installation of a roundabout or some sort of alternative intersection type treatment that would accommodate the turning movements.
Thank you for that. And I may have other questions, but I was just going to try and find them without. So if I can just hand you over to the chair here.
Turn on mic. Mr. Harrison, just referring to your pre-circulated evidence. Paragraph 31. Top of page 7.
Yes.
So no crash history in the last 3 to 4 years. Could that just be good luck?
Yes, it could be. Yes. A crash is a random event. Sometimes you'll get a crash within your search period. Sometimes you won't. Yeah. It just depends on, luck.
Yeah. And then at your paragraph 32, with the proposed pavement marking alterations in place, you say it would be adequate to cater for general traffic generated by the site, etc. Is your opinion on that the case in all weather conditions? Would that be your same conclusion on a really rainy day or a foggy day?
Those road marking alterations were altering the left and the right, altering the left and the right turn markings on Te Puna Station Road approach to the intersection.
Yeah.
And so, I don't think it would make any difference as to whether it's a rainy day.
I understand that,
foggy day.
but my question is, with those road markings in place, say a heavy vehicle was making a right-hand turn from Te Puna Road into Te Puna Station Road, with the road markings in place on a really rainy day where visibility is limited, or on a foggy day, I presume you get fog around here sometimes, is it still your opinion that there'd be a less than minor traffic safety risk without the road widening and the right turning bay in place?
It's quite often harder to see road markings in the rain. Yes.
Yeah, look, sorry, I'm not sure I'm making my question
yeah,
clear. I'm not worried about someone being able to see the marking.
No, sorry.
I'm worried about the fact if the markings are in place, which is to enable
Yes.
the truck to turn around into Te Puna Station Road better, even with that in place, if the truck is stationary on the road and it's a really rainy day or a really foggy day for traffic proceeding north, would there still be a less than minor traffic safety risk without having a right turning bay in place?
Right.
Yes, sorry.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yes, I think it would still be, yes. Obviously, there's, if you've got rain and fog, it does reduce visibility, but those sorts of things are normally allowed for in the design guides and in the selection or the guidelines that they prepare and in the site distances that they require.
Okay, so if I can just paraphrase your answer to me was yes, on in all weather conditions with the proposed mitigation, without a right turning bay, the traffic safety risk would still be minor or less because of the existing site distances.
Yes.
Okay. your paragraph 44. So I'm now asking about, I think, the site access. So just to confirm, I know what it's currently going to look like. Is the current site access, which is now diagram E, is that shown on the figure attached to the rear end of Mr. Boss's evidence? He's got an aerial photograph showing a site access redevelopment proposal.
I haven't got.
I'm sure someone in your team can provide you with Mr. Boss's evidence, and if you can turn to the very last page, there's a diagram of the site access upgrade, and that has, I just want to make sure, does that represent diagram E?
I think I know the one that you're referring to.
Yeah.
No, that is not diagram E.
Okay, so where do I find diagram E?
Diagram E is a higher standard yet again, with additional widening for a greater distance along the road. Basically, the diagram A is a very minor standard of upgrade, and then it goes up, and the diagram E is the highest standard access.
Yes, now look, I understand that from your evidence. You've told us that you are now saying diagram E is appropriate without the road widening, correct?
No.
No, what are you saying to us now?
What we're recommending is, okay, right. No, I understand where you're coming from. Yes, okay. The structure plan referred.
I'm not interested in the structure plan. I'm interested in what is the applicant now proposing to do at the site access?
Diagram D.
D.
Diagram D, not diagram E.
But you said in your speaking notes that diagram D now translates to diagram E. So now you're confusing me.
Sorry, yes. The diagram, what I was referring to there was that in the original structure plan, it refers to diagram D.
Yeah.
That has now changed, and that is diagram E.
Yes.
But we're not proposing to upgrade the access to diagram E. We're proposing to upgrade it to the new diagram D. So sorry, yes, that is rather confusing.
Oh, hang on a minute. So where do I find a diagram or an aerial photograph of what is now being proposed?
There's a Stratum drawing, which I have a copy here, which shows what's now being proposed.
Right, and whose evidence is that attached to?
That was attached to my transportation assessment report.
Right. Okay.
Now,
So have you got a page reference for that?
it was just.
What was the date of your assessment?
Oh, hang on. I'll just have to check that. Where is my latest transportation assessment report? Sorry, I've got so much.
Just while the witness is checking his notes, it's my understanding that the latest, if you like, technical drawing, which does equate to the new diagram D, is found as the first attachment to Mr. Boss as evidence.
Yeah, that's what I asked Mr. Harrison, and he said no.
Sorry, I hadn't seen Mr.
Well, I'm sure I asked someone to give you Mr. Boss's evidence, and you then appeared to be looking at something.
Sorry, I haven't got Mr. Boss's evidence. Yes, sorry. Okay, no, so I was wrong. Sorry. That drawing is the diagram D.
Yeah.
That is being proposed. Yes, sorry.
Right, so I'll cross out your no and I'll write a yes.
Yes, sorry.
Okay, good. Glad we've clarified that. Okay, back to your evidence. So it's your evidence to us that the diagram that we've just focused on is adequate And a question is, would that still be the case upon full development of the Te Puna structure plan area? Will that site access diagram that we just looked at be adequate in
No.
that case?
No, what's proposed for the full development is to put the additional widening on
Sorry,
it.
can you say that again?
What's proposed for the full development is to include the road widening on
Yes.
the opposite side of the road.
Yeah. Okay. Just a couple of questions that have in my mind based on not so much your evidence, but just the other background material we've been provided with, which there was a huge amount of. So at the site access that we've just been discussing, is any vegetation clearance required to make that a safe access?
No.
No, okay. And is Te Puna Station Road still under width compared to the council standard of 8.5 metres?
Yes, it is.
And is Te Puna Station Road still 6.5 to 7.2 metres wide in general?
Yes, that's correct.
Okay. Excellent. So, Mr. Harrison, that's all I had for you. James, any other questions?
Just the one question, just to clarify a question that was asked to you by the chair. In terms of the widening that when you said it's part of the full development, is that the current resource consents that are on hold? Just to clarify, when you say the full development.
Yes, that's correct.
Okay, so the widening is proposed within those two consents.
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
All right, well, that's pretty good timing. I think we'll take a morning tea break now, and then we can hear from the remainder of the applicant's witnesses after that. So we'll adjourn now for, because we're not going to run out of time today, let's adjourn for 20 minutes, and we'll come back at 10 minutes to 11. Is that suitable?
Yes, thank you.
All right, we'll do that. Thank you. Morning, everyone. We're going to resume the hearing, and Mr. Gardner-Hopkins, back to you.
Thank you. We've just had a slight blip with Mr. May. He went to the wrong hearing venue. So he is hurrying over here, but we can proceed with Mr. Boss.
That's absolutely fine. So just wait while I open up the other evidence.
And Mr. Boss, just to confirm, the commissioners have read your statement, and so they don't need you to read it out. If you wanted to give a very short summary, you're welcome to. Otherwise, we're jumping into questions.
Yeah, hi, I'm Stephen Boss.
Good morning, Mr. Boss.
Very short summary, yes, I'm civil engineer working for Stratum, prepared the report. The summary of the report is that the stormwater released from the site has no greater effect than the permitted activity from the site being a metal yard. And in relation to the stormwater culvert, the installation and construction of same is not expected to be any worse than a normal construction event elsewhere.
Yep, very straightforward. And we'll see if we have any questions for you. Questions for Mr. Boss?
Thank you, Mr. Boss. I have no questions for you. Thank you.
Mr. Boss, just one question from me. The current access upgrade includes the 800 millimetre diameter culvert. Would that size of culvert be adequate to cater for stormwater flows upon full development of the site?
That's a question for Steve Joins, who I believe is coming along later. In terms of that question, the culvert is allowing flows from up catchment to pass through. The actual flows from the site itself are actually at the moment sort of coming either side of that. So it's contributing to the flow, but it's not the main component of the site.
Right.
So it's sort of a larger event pipe installed to cater for the whole thing.
All right. Mr. Gardner-Hopkins, maybe we could just put that question to Mr. Joins. He doesn't need to come online. You can just convey his answer to us, if that's fine.
Yes.
But Mr. Boss, your point is that the stormwater flows from the site itself would be a minor input to the drain that the culvert is designed to cater for.
Yeah.
Okay, no, understood. All right, that's all I wanted to ask you about, so thank you.
Thank you.
Just pause till Mr. May gets here. I think we should
He's
hear from
probably
Mr.
not-
May before we hear from the sweeper, your planner.
He's probably not far away. The alternative is that Mr. Crossan could make a start, perhaps just at some of the background matters that have come out of a couple of the questions this
Okay.
morning already. Just so we're not stop-starting entirely.
You happy with that, James? Should we make use of the time? Or? All right, well, let's do that. Mr. Crossan, you can commence your presentation, and when Mr. May comes at an appropriate point in your presentation, just we'll pause and we'll hear from him, maybe before. And then once we've heard from him, if you already talked to us about your planning assessment of landscape stuff, we can come back to it, or maybe you should just leave that until we've heard from Mr. May.
Yeah, thank you for that, Commissioners. I guess we'll just see how we go and what time Mr. May gets here, but possibly it would be better that I went last, but I think for now I can certainly clarify some of those queries that have come to some of the other experts this morning. So just one of your first questions to Mr. Daniel about who was advising him and sort of his consultant engagement. I understand that I wasn't involved in the court process myself back in 2005. I understand Mr. Daniel's counsel, along with the two other business park owners, was Martin Williams at the time. The project manager that Mr. Daniel refers to is Mr. Grant Overton, who was one of the business park owners and is still one of the owners of the properties there. I understand that Mr. Daniel had Harrison Grierson as his planner at the time, and Opus were his engineers. From when the Environment Court, and this is what I understand from Mr. Daniel, from when the Environment Court decision...
I just didn't catch, who were the planners in that time?
Harrison Grierson
Oh, yeah.
were the original planners.
Thanks.
And that's what I understand from Mr. Daniel. Now, as I understand it, from around the time the Environment Court decision was issued until 2019-ish, when the first abatement notice was issued, Mr. Daniel didn't have any specialist consultants working for him during that time or legal counsel. It was only once that abatement notice got served, he then went and engaged a planner. So, as I understand it, Mr. Daniel was in contact during that time period with Mr. Philip Martelli, who was the previous resource management manager here at council. And he was his primary contact in terms of all things council and development of the site. From 2019, I understand Mr. Daniel engaged a consultant planner, and he had Tiaki Engineering working for him, and Stratum, which is my company, was engaged purely at that point as in a survey capacity. From and around about late 2020, 2021, I understand that Mr. Daniel's planner couldn't carry on because they were moving out of the district and may have potentially had some health issues as well. And so our person at Stratum, that was Mr. Daniel's contact, advised Mr. Daniel that we could have or could assist with the planning with that. So yeah, once that happened, one of my employees who's since left was originally dealing with the planning matters, and then I became involved once that employee left in around about 2021. So yeah, just before I carry on, any further queries on that background?
No, that's helpful context. Anything? No. Yep.
And I should also note that around about that 2020 time period was when Mr. Daniels engaged Ms. Lara Burkhart as counsel to assist with the abatement notice matters. Just another matter of clarification, just in case Mr. Harrison didn't quite clarify this clearly, but as part of the wider structure plan, or the other first and second resource consents, as I could refer to them, it is proposed to construct the new Diagram E planning policy standard. And as I understand it, the applicant is more than willing to do that. It just involves quite a bit more work and could take quite some time with that widening component on the northern side. There's proximity to the Kiwi Rail rail corridor. There's some drain widening works that are currently envisaged as part of the stormwater and flooding solution for the overall business park. However, that's still to be confirmed. So based on Mr. Harrison's opinion, the current proposed Diagram D without the widening was suitable to cater for the access for these activities. You may still need may still like some clarification on the 1800 mil culvert from Mr. Joins, but as I understand it, that is part of the wider solution for the wider structure plan flooding. It's not necessary to do it as part of this development. However, it just makes practical sense to put that culvert in at the same time as the entrance is being upgraded. I also note that the most recent version of the drawing as appended to Mr. Boss's evidence, the only change to that drawing is the culvert being relocated inside the boundary of the property rather than anything dimensionally in terms of the displays of the access. And really that's to align with the, again, future structure plan requirements to realign the roadside drain within Mr. Daniel's property to allow for the widening of Te Puna Station Road. So yes, those were the general matters of clarification that I had to date. Perhaps I could...
Sorry, just before you move on, just in terms of, I do recall now from something I read that we had been told that the culvert would be relocated inside the property boundary. Where do we find the updated design diagram for that?
That is shown on the plan attached to Mr. Boss's evidence.
Okay, so that one has the culvert inside the property boundary, so that's the correct.
I believe so,
Okay,
yes.
all right, yep, I can see it now. Okay.
So perhaps I could, with your permission, just provide an update on the stormwater quality
Yep, that's a good idea, let's do that now.
matter. So apologies that you hadn't received that before today. I had received that report on Friday and passed that on, so you may or may not have had a chance to have a quick read over it during the morning tea break. But in summary, there was a sample taken from the culvert that discharges from the site to the drain, which is referred to as sample 2 in the report. And as comparison, there was a sample taken from the roadside drain, and both of those samples were tested. Based on the results of this BCD report and the lab testing, was that the stormwater from the site sorry, I'll just take a step back. So what the author of this report, Mr. Wodger, has done is he has compared the results to the Western Bay of Plenty District Council's comprehensive stormwater discharge consent for Katikati and the contaminant levels specified in that. That's a regional council consent that Western Bay holds.
Yep.
And from those results, he has confirmed that the stormwater from the site is below the required environmental limits for all the substances that he tested for, which is sediment, copper, zinc, and petroleum hydrocarbons. However, the roadside drain contains some elevated levels of copper, but because that drain receives a very large water collection from a very large catchment, as well as the road, it hasn't been possible within the timeframes to confirm what the source of that copper might be. So happy to answer any questions on that, if you have any.
Right, we see that seems reasonably straightforward. Do you have any questions on the stormwater quality sampling? Okay.
You've certainly read my evidence, which is rather lengthy. So again, I don't think I need to step you through that. But I'm, happy to answer questions now, if that's what you want to do, unless you want me to give you a brief summary.
Well, that's really over to you. So if you think we would benefit from a summary, you can give us a summary, or if you're confident that we've read the evidence, you don't need to do a summary, but normally I'll leave that up to the witness and to whoever's representing or running the case to decide.
Yeah, okay, I'll start with a brief summary. So, two key things, I suppose, from a planning point of view. Obviously, we've got the effects, and then we've got the objectives and policy side of things. So, in terms of the effects, all but traffic really seems to be either as being accepted as being able to be mitigated, or minor, or to a less than minor extent. The key traffic matters, as we've heard from Mr. Harrison, are really the site access and the, for want of a better word, lack of widening opposite that, and the Tupuna Station Road intersection and the safety around that. So I realise that having read Council's traffic expert reports, there are some concerns. However, I would prefer the evidence of Mr. Harrison purely on the basis of the site-specific measurements that he's done in terms of site distances and the traffic surveys that he's undertaken I think is from a factual basis, he's been able to make a good assessment there. So overall, in my view, as I've stated in my evidence, I don't believe that the effects are more than minor, which is obviously contrary to Ms. Pearing's view, and therefore that first arm of the Section 104D test is met. In terms of the objectives and policies, as Mr. Gardner-Hopkins has set out earlier, I'm also of the view that it's a pretty high threshold in terms of being repugnant to or contrary to objectives and policies. So as I have stated in my evidence, the original application and subsequent Section 92 response information, my view is that on the whole, the application isn't contrary to or repugnant to those objectives and policies. I note that Ms. Pearing, in her assessment in her Section 42A report, again, has referenced many of those as set out in my evidence as being inconsistent with. However, in my view, that inconsistency doesn't automatically translate to being contrary to or repugnant to. So overall, in my view, in terms of the objectives and policies, I remain of the opinion that the application certainly isn't contrary to or repugnant to those. In terms of precedent, which is obviously an important consideration for non-complying activities and discretionary activities these days for that matter. But in my view, it's in a somewhat unique way of looking at this precedent. It's certainly not an advertisement of what you should do. There's a clear case that you should get your consents in place before you go ahead and set up activities. So I certainly think it's not a good advertisement. And I think really that the key thing in my mind here is that we're dealing with a small number of activities. There is a finite time frame proposed, and the land is zoned industrial. So it's not the case of where you might have a commercial activity, consent being sought for a commercial activity, for example, in a residential zone that could operate in perpetuity, essentially, if a consent were granted. So I've made a few suggestions to some of Ms. Pearing's conditions of consent there. Look, overall, I think the draft set that Ms. Pearing's provided largely is okay to mitigate the effects of the activity. As I've suggested in there's a few minor amendments in terms of landscaping and time frames. As you'll see in there, I have suggested the wording be changed to the commencement of consent rather than the granting of consent. As I've set out, if the consent was appealed, then it wouldn't commence until those appeals have been resolved. So that's effectively my summary for you, and happy to take questions as required.
Thanks for that. No, I'm just wondering if Mr. May was arrived.
Sorry, I've just actually got another message from Mr. May. He's on his way, and that was 9 minutes ago. So.
All right, well, look, I think to make use of the time, we might start asking you any questions we had, but any questions that related to elements of your evidence that touch on landscape and visual effects, we'll wait till we've heard from Mr. May and then come back to you on that.
Yep.
So, James, starting with you, questions from Mr. Crossan.
Kia ora, Mr. Crossan. Hey, I guess the first question I got is, any part of your evidence may change from as a result of the change of position from Pirirako? is there any changes in your view, or like in terms of what you presented us?
Yes, sorry, I should have addressed that. So, in my view, and again, we may need to address this further once we hear from Ms Shepherd in due course, but in my view, the change from support to neutral is still acceptable. The updated Pirirako assessment of cultural effects has retained the same recommendation for conditions to be imposed that the applicants proffered, so and is still willing to proffer those. So yeah, it certainly hasn't changed from support to opposition, which would be a much bigger concern in my view. So I'm still of the opinion that that neutral stance with those recommended conditions is acceptable.
I guess, and I'll be asking this question of Pirirako tomorrow, I guess, is initial thoughts is, has there been a breakdown in the relationship, I guess, because obviously seeing the first response being support conditional, and then this change, I guess I'm trying to understand what's happening maybe in the background around the change of position, and whether or not it's reflective of a relationship or not.
Yeah, look, certainly that's not, as far as I know, there's been no breakdown in a relationship between the applicant and Pirirako or Ms Shepherd in terms of the Pirirako tribal authority. I understand that that's just been an internal change from Pirirako.
Another question, and if I can go to whereabouts is it, because it's in response to the MPS FM, and you reserve your thoughts, waiting for the stormwater report as it relates to the MPS FM. Wish to share any thoughts?
Yep, no, I can definitely speak to that. So, as I've just set out, based on the results that we've got, the water from the site is clean per se. I note that there is a requirement in that MPS to improve water quality over time. Now, I can advise that as part of the applicant's first and second applications, there is a larger stormwater management plan for the site, which involves collecting and piping all the waters to treatment swales and wetlands. However, I don't believe, again, as this consent is, well, one, as the results come back clean in terms of that water quality, and as this consent's only temporary, that's a matter that would be a must for this application per se.
Sorry. So, and I guess just to help me understand, because you whereabouts up in your summary, I'll scroll back up, that was point 17, and you make the conclusion, I've concluded the adverse effects of the proposal are no more than minor overall, and so there's that kind of capture overall. I guess where I'm trying to explore with you, is there a, in your view, there is an element there may be more than minor effects by using the overall to, in your thoughts?
No. Sorry. Yeah, no, I remain of the view that I suppose that is just a summary of my opinion on all of the effects, rather than there being any doubt in my mind that those effects are more than, or there's any effect that's more than one. You know, I certainly believe there are effects that are minor and not less than minor, but certainly not more than minor.
Thank you. There is a reference in, gosh, can you hear me? I can't hear myself. Around that there was a, so we're looking at 4 activities being proposed that are currently on site. And there is a reference in 24 that there was a previous tyre operation. Is that my correct understanding, that this is what was previously on there as a tyre storage is different to what was proposed in this application.
Yes, that's correct. Before, and this was before my involvement, but as I understand it, and perhaps Mr. Daniel could provide you some further clarity on that, but there was a much larger tyre storage operation on the site. And they may have also been in the business of recycling tyres, I understand, but that activity is certainly no longer there now.
And I'm mindful that, because everyone's referring back to the previous resource consent or the first two, and we're currently talking about the third one. So if you can just help me understand, they currently are on hold, but the information that they're requesting is being progressed?
Yes, that's correct. There's still a number of matters to address on those. They are on hold, they are being progressed. Fundamentally, the two major issues, as I see it, are stormwater and the flooding for the overall catchment. And there's obviously still some discussion on the Tapuna Station Road, Tapuna Road intersection. There's other minor matters around, well, I suppose there is one other matter, and that is still cultural considerations with Piriraka on the wider application as well, that we haven't fully addressed or discussed with them yet. And yeah, the other things are minor type site-specific requirements, geotech, services, those sorts of things. But I can probably just expand on that a bit further. The stormwater and the flooding for the overall catchment has been a very big body of work. It has involved the other two business park owners as well and their consultants. And there is essentially, as I understand it, there's a solution there now, but that requires the agreement of the three property owners. Every one of them has to contribute something to that, whether it be financially or land to make things work. That is an ongoing discussion, so that is a work in progress. And there's also just probably some consenting issues around the installation of a third culvert at Teihana Road that still needs to be addressed as well. So there's a pathway forward, I believe, in terms of those consenting requirements, but again, it's just working through those matters.
Do you want to jump in? I got heaps more, so I'll let you.
So I just got a couple of questions for you, and then I just want to go through the conditions. I've got quite a few queries on the recommended conditions, and just for those present in the room and anyone watching on live stream, you shouldn't assume that because I have a whole lot of questions about the conditions that I think the consent should be granted. That's still a decision that we have yet to discuss and make. But as part of that decision-making process, we need to understand whether or not the offered conditions will mitigate the effects down to a level that's minor or less. That's the background for my questions on the conditions, and also just to make sure that they are worded clearly and with certainty. So with that caveat in mind, I do have some questions from the evidence though. So the first one's at your paragraph 59.
Yes, I've got that in front of me.
Yeah, and you're saying the third line, this is because there is debate as to whether the district plan anticipates activities being consented ahead of the structure plan requirements being met. And what did you mean by that? I'm focusing on the words there is debate as to whether the plan anticipates activities being consented ahead of the structure plan. I didn't think there was any debate on that.
I've had somewhat of a mind blank going back to this now, but
I assume you did write it.
yeah, no, that's correct. I did. Certainly, there's a requirement that, well, prior to, if should, for instance, an activity want to operate before their structure plan requirements are met, that's quite clear that that's a non-complying activity in the plan. I guess what I was saying there, it's not prohibited for activities to start up before meeting those structure plan requirements.
Can you point to a provision in the district plan that would enable me as a decision maker to be confident that the district plan anticipates activities being consented ahead of the structure plan requirements being met?
Certainly not as a permitted or controlled activity.
Yeah. Paragraph 71. And the fourth line, you say some of these other activities, as you understand it, are not authorised. And just, I was curious about that. Which ones?
I understand that there is some activities on the OLP, which is the Overton site on the northern side of Te Puna Station Road, that are subject to an abatement notices.
Right.
As the applicant's activities are.
Mm-hmm. Okay. And can you recall what sort of activities?
There's a little bit of a crossover there because there is a large consented civil construction yard on one of the adjoining sites. I understand that that has some consent, so I haven't looked into the great detail about that, but I understand that there, I couldn't be definitive on all the activities, but again, I understand there's a swimming pool storage yard there. There's also a yard that stores possibly like Modcom type buildings. So,
okay. So somewhat similar to the activities that we're dealing with today.
Correct. Yeah. Okay. And we'll certainly be able to possibly see those on our site visit tomorrow.
Sure. Paragraph 84, I just want to ask you about the positive effects that you list there, and of course that's only relevant if we manage to get through one or either of the 104D gateways. But when I read that, I thought, are these all actually positive effects, or are they simply mitigation measures required to address the adverse effects of the activities before us? And in that regard, I thought that you got them in front of you?
Yep.
Yep. A, B, C, F, G, H, and I, they're not positive effects, are they? They're merely mitigation measures.
They are mitigation, correct, but I think given the current circumstances, they're positive in terms of the current circumstances.
I'm still not understanding how that's a positive effect. So if mitigation is proffered to deal with adverse effects of currently unauthorised activities, how can that be a positive effect? All that does is remedy what's currently occurring. It doesn't actually enhance the environment, doesn't positively advance other things like social and economic well-being, does it?
Yep. No, I mean, in that context, I'll accept that.
Okay. And 113. 113. Yep. Yep. Now, this comes back to the issue I raised with Mr. Gardner-Hopkins earlier on. So altering the paint marking provisions on a public road, obviously, Mr. Daniel can't, and his people just can't go ahead and do that. So has the council agreed, if we were to grant consent, has the council agreed to change those paint markings?
I can't advise if the council roading department has confirmed that. I note that Ms. Perrins included that in her suggested conditions of consent, so.
Yeah, I'll ask her about that when we hear from her, but just want to understand your understanding of it.
Yeah, but look, I know the point you raised to Mr. Gardner-Hopkins earlier in that there is other ways and means of wording of how that condition could be worded so that the council could undertake that work and the applicant pay for it, so.
Yeah. So to the 42A reporting team, when we hear from you, obviously that's a key issue in my mind. Notwithstanding the wording of any condition, if the council is the road controlling authority, is the council the road controlling authority there, or is it a state highway?
It's the council.
Yeah, so as the road controlling authority doesn't agree to change the paint markings, any condition we might impose, however it's worded, might be moot. So interested to know what the council position on that is when we hear from you.
I mean, I have had several instances. I mean, whenever you're working on a council or within a council road reserve, you obviously need the approval of the council to do that.
Yeah, it's a separate process for that, isn't
Yeah,
it?
correct. It is a separate process. And a lot of the time in the consents that I've been involved with, there's been a condition to that, but that has then required a separate development works approval or engineering approval process after
Sure,
that.
I understand that, but if the key mitigation for the traffic safety effect at that intersection that's being proposed by the applicant, based on the evidence of Mr. Harrison, is to repaint that painted traffic island. So if that isn't going to occur, that fundamentally affects our effects decision, I think. All right, so now I've just got some questions about the conditions. Just let me find them.
Sorry, if I can just jump in. You may have some
Do you need
questions
to
about
jump in
the
when I'm
landscape
asking-
conditions.
Sorry, on landscape? What do you want to jump in about?
I was just observing that you might have some questions about the landscaping
Yes.
conditions.
Yeah.
And I did wonder if this might be an appropriate time to actually
Oh,
hear
we've
from Mr.
got
May,
Mr. May,
who
right.
has arrived.
Excellent, good suggestion. I didn't notice he'd arrived. Yep, so we'll pause now. And before we turn to conditions, we'll hear from Mr. May. Good morning, welcome, Mr. May.
Yes, and I have explained to him that the evidence has been pre-read, and I'll invite him to make a few summary comments, but that the approach is very much centred on the questions that you might have.
Yep, that's fine. So, Mr. May, you must have had a bit of stress when you turned up at the wrong venue.
It happens. I mean, I've been more late to things. Yeah, so summary of my evidence is that Botany School initially approached in order to undertake an assessment of the existing landscaping on site and to advise where that differed from the business park structure plan. Later, it was done by Blair Clinch, my colleague. Following that, council requested that a landscape effects assessment was undertaken to determine the difference between the new proposed landscape mitigation plan and the existing plan and the structure plan. Based on that, I reviewed the intended outcomes of that structure plan against the eventual outcomes of the landscape mitigation plan, and I concluded that the level of effects were less than minor overall in that the difference between the two types of planting. Following that, I received Section 92 comments from council, which we addressed regarding the light reflectance values of the compass pooled shells, and also produced a zone of theoretical visibility to further ascertain where views were available from non-publicly accessible land. following that, we attended a site visit to specifically identified properties that would have views over the site to ground truth the findings of our assessment that was undertaken with Mr. Manser. And I don't believe following those site visits, he changed his opinion on those levels of effects and is still widely in agreement with the outcomes of my assessment.
Okay, you ready for questions?
Yep.
Yep, okay. James?
Kia ora, Mr. May.
Good.
At 15 on your evidence, you make the statement in terms of landscape effects. I believe the rural character of the site has been reduced due to land modification. In terms of just helping me understand that position, is that from the illegal works? Or, in terms of, there was a certain amount of works that's one could be seen as part of the existing environment, and then obviously there's elements of illegal works that could not part of the existing environment. So I'm just trying to get a clarity when you say reduced. Is it from what's your perspective on the environment that's been reduced? I guess?
Yeah, so within the context of my report, I've looked at the land surrounding the existing activities only, that the wider context and other things that have happened outside of that have essentially been disregarded, although they are part of the environment now. Within my context, I'm solely looking at the sites within the areas of existing activities that outside, and it was my understanding that the earthworks taken within those bounds were legal.
I'm not sure of the answer. Can you repeat it again? Sorry, Mr. May.
Sorry, so the context of my assessment relates specifically to the area where the existing activities are taking place, and to the best of my knowledge, those earthworks were legal, although earthworks outside, the other earthworks have taken place on the balance of the site. For the purposes of my report, they were not being considered at this stage.
Okay. So in terms of your role with this particular project, as well as, are you also part of the first two consents currently with council that are on hold, which sees the bigger picture, I guess?
No.
No, so you've only been engaged just for this particular part here. Okay. Reduces by questions a bit. That's all good. It's good to know. Okay. I'm mindful that this application is for 2 years. So there's this conversation around the establishment or the actual mitigation of the planting, noting that this resource consent is only for 2 years. Sorry, just talking to this. I guess I'd just like to revisit that again with you. And so I guess understanding your level of confidence in that kind of transition over this 2-year period of the mitigation planning that you put forward, the plan that you put forward. And, obviously there's a difference with Mr. Manser around the temporary effects that sort of exists between it. Where I'm going with this is the wording or the language that's been used across this application is the duration of 2 years is also viewed as temporary. So everyone's still saying that this is a temporary consent, even though it's 2 years. And so I'm trying to get a gauge on your consideration of temporary effects, but also that this is only a 2-year consent for those to fully mitigate what's existing on site that you've said has reduced the level of rural character out there. So can you take me, can you share a bit more on your thoughts rather than me reading it again?
Yeah, sure. So in terms of the reduction of rural character, I think inherently by introducing industrial activities, which are zoned for, that will have an effect on the rural character. I understand that the context of the structure plan is to limit that, but that's only possible to a specific extent, that it will still be an industrial park with mitigation, but overall that context will change, and that's an expected outcome. In terms of the temporary effects, usually you would have a performance standard that planting would be expected to get to, and that would be your overall outcome. Within the structure plan, it doesn't specify that performance criteria, and therefore I didn't think it was appropriate to provide temporary level of effects, because from my reading of the structure plan and the Environment Court decision, once the planting is in place, it is in place, and everything after that is, provided it's been signed off and various other agreements have been hit, that planting is in place, and therefore it's aligned with what those expectations. The ongoing maintenance and growth of that planting will then extend, but there isn't a mechanism in which we can measure against that. We can look at what the overall outcome will be eventually, and we've assessed that within our assessment, but in the interim period, there isn't a performance that it has to meet, and therefore it's not possible to judge how far behind it is. And that's, I think, where the main difference lies between my and Mr. Mansell's position.
So with respect to the performance standards, is that, and there's no performance standards in the plan or no performance standards in the structure plan part of the plan?
In the structure plan, or the Environment Court decision.
So just relying on your expertise and assessment of the whole plan, did you look at the whole plan and whether there was performance standards?
Yeah, within the whole plan, there's no stated outcome or specific height that is required for mitigation to have been set, and therefore it's very difficult to, especially for a 2-year temporary consent, to look at where we would be against that standard.
So I guess, again, just exploring your expertise. So in your expertise or in your portfolio of work, there's no comparative to work with in terms of what they could look like?
I think it's within my abilities as an assessor, I can see what the outcome, eventual outcome would be, and you can divine that from the structure plan. I can understand where they want to get to eventually. In terms of assessing when the effects are mitigated, there isn't a point at which they become mitigated when planting reaches a certain height. Potentially that should have been included, but as it hasn't, it's not possible to, we can't judge it against a standard that we're now putting in that wasn't there previously.
You make a comment at 34 in your evidence. Which is, I do not consider the bollards or barriers unnecessary. It is not in the applicant's interest to spend time and money on planting for them and then to simply not care for, I guess this is referring back to the planting regime, I guess. I'm trying to remember why I had that flagged. I guess in terms of understanding, I guess from a landscapes values context, not necessarily a cost implication to why you wouldn't do something, but more so around as a mitigation measure. Can you just help me understand that from your perspective around why you don't consider bollards and barriers unnecessary?
Well, from my perspective, they weren't part of the original structure plan or an expected outcome. And now having a 3-meter offset further kind of limits the amount of site available. A 10-meter wide landscaping strip within this context is fairly generous, and to add another 3 meters on that, in terms of protecting the landscape, I think it's above and beyond what would be required to ensure that landscape is successful and thrives and meets its mitigation criteria eventually. And within the context of the site, it being a park rural site, providing bollards and various other barriers in that way, I think it's beyond what's required.
That's all the questions I have. Thank you, Mr. May.
Thank you.
So, Mr. Mayor, I'm interested in understanding not so much whether the planting does or does not achieve what the structure plan envisaged or how long that might take. I'm interested in getting a clear understanding on, given what's existing on the site and what's proposed to occur by way of mitigation early on within the 2-year proposed consent duration, because there's no point having mitigation that only becomes effective in months 23 or 24, for example. So I'm going to ask you about that. So my understanding is that in terms of the bunds and the vegetation that's already planted along the boundary with Te Puna Station Road, there'll be some infill planting to I guess, address some gaps in that planting. Is that correct? So is my understanding correct?
Yeah, that's correct.
Yeah. Now, in the absence of that infill planting occurring, would the adverse visual effects be mitigated to a level minor or less?
Without that planting,
Yeah.
the planting replacements are relatively minor, but there are a few, so I don't think the overall performance standard would reduce to an effect that was more than minor or minor.
Okay.
So in my long story short, it would remain less than minor without that planting, but it's best practice to replace it.
Yes, okay, good. And in terms of the infill planting, if that occurred immediately upon commencement of the consent, do you have any idea how long it might take before it provided some effective additional screening? Would it be a matter of months or would it be a matter of years?
That would be dependent on the size that the plants were in. In theory, it'd be instant, but
Okay.
I don't consider that the amount of planting missing or needs to be replaced is enough to cause a overly adverse effect in the wider scheme.
Okay. So if upon commencement, the infill planting used suitably large size plants, the mitigation would be effective immediately?
Correct.
Correct, okay. So same question now in terms of views from the eastern boundary of the site. Understand again, there's a bund there with some planting on it already. Is any infill planting proposed along that eastern boundary?
From my observations on site, there would need to be some,
There would be
a small
some?
amount of infill planting.
Yeah.
But that would have to be sort of further surveyed,
Okay.
a quick plan for that, but relatively minor.
And so same questions, in the absence of that infill planting, the visual adverse effects from the eastern side of the site, minor or less?
I believe they're still less than minor, but as I said, it's best practice to replace those.
So same answers as we had for the Te Puna Station Road. Okay. Now, in terms of views from the south, I think the landscape improvement plan recommends some additional planting along the boundary behind the tyre services site and the Compass Pool sites. Is that correct?
Yeah.
And is there, we'll have a look tomorrow, but is there any, doesn't appear from the aerial photographs, which may be out of date, is there any mitigation planting along those two boundaries at all at the moment?
There is some mitigation planting.
Okay. And so same questions in current situation without infill planting, are the visual effects minor or less when viewed from the south?
Yeah, it's slightly difficult because where it's possible to view them. I think currently there is one specific view from Clark Road where you would say that it doesn't meet the standards that you'd expect. And I think that's why in our evidence we've recommended that additional planting is provided.
Yeah, I'm not worried about standards being met. The question was, in the absence of infill planting on that southern boundary, adjoining the tyre services site and the Compass Pool sites, adverse visual effects when viewed from viewing points to the south, minor or less?
They would be probably set at minor, low moderate.
Okay. So that, in your opinion, that'd currently be minor, and with the infill planting, I assume they'd reduce below that?
I think the shade screen proposed would actually is more of a
Okay,
mitigation measure than the planting would be.
okay. And so the shade screen, just to remind me, so that's going to be along, is that the southern and western boundaries of the tyre services site?
Of the Compass Pool site.
Only the pool site?
It's only the pools that are
Okay,
non-compliant.
yep. So the shade screen would provide, I guess, as soon as it's installed, instant mitigation of the Compass Pool sites. What about the tyre services site then?
The tyres don't contravene a light reflectance value issue.
I'm
With
not,
the pools
I'm not
do.
talking about reflectivity, I'm talking about adverse visual effects when viewed
They
from
don't
the south.
produce an adverse visual effect outside of what would be expected within the site.
And then just turning to the western boundary of the site. So the shade screen will be on the, correct me if I'm wrong, the western and southern boundaries of that Compass Pool site, is that correct?
Correct.
Okay. And with that in place, would adverse visual effects when viewed from properties to the west be minor or less, in your opinion?
Less than minor.
Okay. Rightio. The areas of disagreement, I think, between yourself and the council's expert, there's a couple of matters of detail. That's the buffer distance of activities from the landscape planting, whether it's 1 metre or 3 metres. I think your view is 1 metre. What's the basis for 1 metre?
Then that would be enough to not impact on the developing root system. But three meters would be a significantly distant away, more than you'd be required to protect those trees, those plants.
I didn't quite catch what you say. Did you say 1 metre is sufficient not to impact on the root zone system of the?
Yeah.
Okay. And in your experience, is 1 metre a commonly imposed buffer distance for landscape planting?
Depending on the context, the 1 meter is normally sufficient.
Okay. And in terms of the shade screen, that's going to be, that's been offered, I think you're suggesting 4.5 metres and the council's witness is suggesting 6 metres. So the basis for 4.5 metres?
I undertook some topographical mapping between the site, the highest pool at the back of the site, and the second level of the dwelling at 110 Te Puna Road. And based on that, at 4.5 meters, you wouldn't be able to see the back of the site from there.
Okay. And was that 110 Te Puna Station Road?
Yeah, 110, yeah.
110, okay. Now, are you able to speak to the Boffa Miskell Te Puna Station Road landscape effects assessment dated 12th May 2023?
Yes.
Okay, cool. Do you have that handy? Okay, I just want to take you just a couple of questions. Firstly, on page 13 of that document.
I'm gone.
Yep. And just hopefully we've got the same document in front of us, but sort of a third of the way down, there's a paragraph that says the Environment Court interim decision A016. Is that?
On page
Actually,
13.
that's not page 30, it's page 13 as stamped in the agenda. So it's just above the heading 4.1, section 4.1, there's a heading landscape effects.
Yep.
And just above that is the paragraph I'm interested in.
Yep.
Yeah, so my question was, in terms of that Environment Court decision, and you see there's a quote there that refers to paragraph 16 with the 16 in square brackets, a number of properties. Do you know which properties they were talking about?
It's not stated within the Environment Court decision which properties those would be. But as 110 Twin Station Road was there at the time, I would imagine.
Okay. All right. And so just on that same report, there's a heading now, 4.1.3, Summary of Landscape and Visual Effects. It's several pages on. Yep. And the very last sentence just above that heading, once internal planting in between the lots has become more established. Did you have a time frame in mind when you wrote that, or whoever wrote that? Do you understand?
That was written by me. In terms of establishment, I would suggest that I think it's between 5 to 6 years it would be established to a point where it would reduce the level of effects.
Yeah. Is the internal planting, is that necessary to avoid adverse visual effects from outside the site looking in?
From elevated properties, it provides some additional mitigation.
Yeah. And are those elevated properties to the north and west?
Only the west I've
Okay.
observed.
Only to the west. They'll be the ones on Tapuna Road.
Correct.
Yeah, okay. Now, look, they're the only questions of clarification I had for you, Mr. May. So I'll just check if my colleague has any further questions. Any further questions? No? Right, that's all we had. Thanks very much for
Thank you very
coming in. So, Mr. Gardner-Hopkins, we were scheduled to break at 12:15, but perhaps if I ask my questions on the conditions, and then we'll see if we have any follow-up questions from Mr. Crossan, we might be able to wrap up before lunch if that suits.
Excellent. Thank you.
Good.
Just, Mr. Chair, before you get on to those questions of the conditions,
Yep.
if I may, just further to the questions that you just asked Mr. May about some of the landscaping queries. You obviously see that when you do your site visit tomorrow, but that infill planting on the bunds is pretty minor in my view, just really replacing dead type plants. Just one point of clarification on the eastern boundary, the immediate adjoining owner, William Phillips, 177 Tapuna Station Road, has provided a supporting submission to the application. So,
Yeah, and he's also provided written approval that which was focused on the stormwater issues. I understand that his written approval also cover visual effects?
No,
Just
his
stormwater.
his written approval covers stormwater effects.
Stormwater, yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
But I believe that he has prepared a statement that you should have or will have,
Yeah, I think they're all at the back there.
that he may have discussed his satisfaction with that bund on the eastern boundary. So
Now
That was all.
we'll view those supporting statements this afternoon. All right, so now just turning the pages on the conditions.
the actual condition,
Yeah,
the
the
condition
appendix.
set.
Yeah, that are appended to your evidence.
Yep.
According to my document, they start at page 97 out of 104 pages of your evidence.
Got those.
Yeah. My first question was at condition 5. I think we've covered that. My concern is that that requires the council to do things. So you've heard my queries, and I'll hear from the council on that. But if you were to consider for our benefit some rewording of that, that would be good.
And I take it you'd be happy for us to do that in the applicant's reply?
Absolutely. I don't expect you to do it at the moment or overnight. That can be done as part of the applicant's reply, which is currently scheduled for Thursday morning. Next question arises at condition 9. So in the towards the bottom of the chapeau, that condition, it says provided to the council's development manager or development engineering manager for approval. I always get antsy when I see the word approval in conditions. We can't delegate approval to another party. Would that be better worded to provide certification in a technical capacity?
Yeah, I'd be happy with that too.
And then normally these type of management plan conditions, erosion and sediment plan conditions, the condition requires certification, and then it states the objectives of the plan or the erosion sediment control plan. And quite often there's an advice note provided that explains the purpose of the certification. So of course the condition can't bind the manager, but it could, by way of advice, say the things the manager would take into account when considering whether or not to technically certify the plan. So
yeah, no, look, I'm agreeable to that approach as well. And again, we can provide some additional clarification and wording in the reply.
Yep. And my same concerns condition 10. Again, it has the word approval in the chapeau of the condition.
Mm-hmm.
So that would need to be also technical certification. Conditions 10B and C, I've already expressed the concern that the conditions can't bind the tenants, so that would need to be reworded to require the consent holder to do something, perhaps the consent holder to contractually oblige the tenants to do, I don't know, it needs to be reworded.
Yeah, look, I understand from discussion with Mr. Daniel there in their lease agreements, there is already requirements for them to comply with certain things.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
I'm happy to reword that to make that somewhat more legible.
Condition 10F, required relevant industry standards. Which industry standards? I think the condition should specify what those standards are.
Oh, okay. In terms of, yes, no, happy with that. So,
Yep. So cover that off. Condition H, again, refers to an approved noise management plan. Now, Mr. Stiles, whose attendance we've excused, he did append a noise management plan to his evidence. So again, I think if this condition was to survive, it needs to be perhaps rewritten and stand alone, whereby the noise management plan that Mr. Stiles has prepared would be submitted to the council for technical certification. There'd be the normal conditions saying what the objective of the plan should be, what the minimum contents of the plan should be, and then perhaps advice notes to say what the relevant person in the council's technical certification would involve. I mean, it's just a pretty standard approach to this kind of thing.
yes, happy with that. Yeah, I note that just, I believe Mr. Stiles has addressed it as evidence anyway, but that is a very recent version of the latest noise management plan as well. So
yeah,
yep,
just for your information, when you when you're compiling those conditions, I didn't have any queries about the content of the noise management plan. That's why we excused Mr. Stiles. It's just how it needs to be covered off in conditions.
Yep.
Yeah.
I understand Mr. Daniels has given a copy of that noise management plan or provided a copy to all of his tenants as well. So just for your information. Yep. But no, happy to work on a more clearer condition for that.
Yeah. And condition 10 I'd suggested could be deleted if the stormwater testing confirmed the discharge is clean. I think notwithstanding the existing water quality results, that's quite a precautionary and necessary condition. We wouldn't want spills to occur or asbestos to enter the roadside drains, would we?
No, I agree. That's a sensible solution.
Condition 10K I found interesting. Having experienced Portaloos myself at numerous music concerts, etc., I was just curious as to how that might be implemented. So what methods for preventing offensive odour beyond the site boundary from a Portaloo were envisaged when you wrote that condition?
I think just making sure that they're regularly maintained and emptied in accordance with the manufacturer's specifications, really. So
it'd be helpful if the condition said that?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay.
In Mr. Crossan's defence, I actually wrote that.
Yeah, well, I should have said at the start that I'm assuming you're listening to all my questions and will respond to them in due course when I hear from you, or we hear from you. So conditions 11, 12 and 13 which involve additional landscape mitigation. Because we're dealing with such a short proposed duration of 2 years, I would think that this mitigation needs to occur, or the planting needs to occur almost as soon as the consent commences. Otherwise, there's very little point in requiring mitigation planting that's not going to occur for 6 months, and then it's going to take a while to grow. And by the time the consent expires, it's kind of like, what's the point? So my view on these conditions is that they would need to be reworded to require things to occur immediately upon commencement, so the mitigation has a good chance of actually being effective.
Yes, I think, as you've heard from Mr. May, it's unlikely that any planting is going to achieve any great mitigation within that 2-year period.
Yeah.
The screening certainly will provide instant mitigation of that pool yard, but it's really just to meet the requirements of what the overall structure plan intends.
Yeah.
Look, 6 months is possibly a bit long as per condition 12.
I don't think there's any possibility about it
No,
too long. It's obviously too long.
I'm just wary that there is obviously a lead into time to source plants as well from nurseries. So I agree 6 months might be too long, but that could be reduced to maybe a period of 2 months or 40 working days.
Yeah, look, I would have thought that any responsible applicant would have been sourcing these plants in anticipation of being granted consent. That's always the hope of an applicant, isn't it, that their consent is granted? So they would have been onto this way before now. And in terms of building the shade screen, I mean, contractors could have been approached and engaged already for that. So I was thinking more of a time frame of 10 working days or less for this to occur. But you'll need to talk to your client about that. But I think any condition that has the word months in it, my immediate concern is that that's not really practical in terms of a 24 duration consent.
Yeah. Look, yeah, I mean, again, I would have to speak to the applicant about their ability to source those plants and contractors to do that work.
Yeah.
But that's certainly something we can address in the reply.
Yeah, so you understand my concern and look forward to your response on that, and also from the reporting team. Condition 20, the landscape implementation plan. Reviewed so much documentation.
Condition, which was that, sir?
Sorry, condition 20, the landscape implementation plan. Is that different from this picture, which is the landscape mitigation planting plan? Where is the landscape implementation plan? I viewed the landscape assessment that Mr. May wrote, and I asked him about that. I've got this picture, which is a landscape mitigation planting plan, but where is the landscape implementation plan?
So the landscape implementation plan is something that hasn't been done and is required under condition
Okay.
11.
Okay. So that's within 6 months.
Yeah. And I guess the intention of that is that will just provide a clearer picture. It will be the landscape mitigation plan with the landscaping associated with this proposal and these conditions included. And maybe I could, possibly a better question for Mr. May, but.
So what's this diagram that I've got, which is titled Landscape Mitigation Planting Plan? What's that?
That's basically, that plan was done obviously prior to the Section 42A report that was done as part of the Section 92 response information.
Yeah.
And that at that time, it was simply proposed to keep what's there, and that effectively shows what's on the ground or planted now.
So maybe rather than condition 11 talking about a 6-month time frame, maybe over the next couple of days, you and Mr. May could put your heads together and modify this diagram to clearly show what mitigation is being offered and referred to in the conditions, and it could just be a one-page document.
If I could offer, the main difference is the landscape mitigation plan, which you have in your hand, is done to a similar scale and level of detail to the Tupuna Road, the structure plan, and so it's there to update that structure plan. The landscape implementation plan, which was proposed by Mr. Manser, is a more detailed version which will look at specific areas and plant numbers on a level that can be taken on site and planted. So it's the next level of detail, and it hasn't yet been undertaken, but it will be shortly after. You know, there is a certain level of on-site investigation that needs to go down to identify areas of replanting where there has been failures and where that additional plant needs to go and plant numbers. So it's just a different level of detail to what you have in your hand.
Okay. So just exploring that a little bit further. So I think Mr. May's answers to my question was that the infill planting wasn't necessary to bring the visual effects down to a level of minor or less. So perhaps a longer time frame to develop that landscape implementation plan isn't so crucial. But I'd still like you to consider, I think the issue though of having the mitigation planting done as soon as possible is still important. So obviously, if you give that some more thought and come back to us and reply on how you intend to address the issue that I've raised.
Yes, that's fine.
You can add, you can ask a question. What's your question? Okay. Yep, no then. So 22 refers to a noise management plan. That can probably refer to Mr. Stiles's noise management plan is appended to his evidence. Might need to say that once certified by the council, that version of the plan or any amended version that pops out of the certification process. Condition 23. Curious about that. What's the financial contribution going to be used for? Do you know?
So I understand the overall structure plan requires financial contributions for roading, essentially as a contribution to upgrading Tupuna Station Road or widening of Tupuna Station Road. So given the applicant is, would effectively be using that Tupuna Station Road for these activities, and then I believe it's a fair and reasonable that they should pay a prorated share of that based on their site area, and it is based on a site area calculation in the plan as well, so that every business park owner pays for their site proportionally.
Okay. So your understanding is the financial contribution is intended to be used to enable the council to widen Tupuna Station Road. Would that occur within the 24-month duration that's been requested?
That would be highly unlikely, I would think, because that is also going to depend on the other parties proceeding and getting to a point as well.
Yeah.
As I understand it, that widening is not a prerequisite for the business park to commence. So,
yeah.
in my view at the time, it was obviously envisaged that they would collect that money as the site's developed and then widen the road following that.
So just to the reporting team, can you just come back to us on that? I'm not understanding why a financial contribution would be required in terms of the retrospective activities for which we're being asked to grant consent for, if it doesn't relate directly to the effects of those activities. If it relates to a wider structure plan issue, then it's probably a matter for those other consents that have been referred to rather than this consent. So you could address that, but it may be that we just would put a line through that. But wait your advice on that. Condition 25, the first line talks about any physical works. What physical works did you have in mind?
For this current proposal, the only physical works currently are the vehicle entrance upgrades. Yeah. So I mean that could be clarified in there.
Yeah, that would be helpful. I mean, it's, the more clear and certain and narrowly defined conditions are, then the better. Condition 26, my understanding is that the only earthworks that are part of the consents we're being asked to consider relate also to the site access. So again, that condition should probably be narrowed. I know these arose out of the Piriako Cultural Impacts Assessment. They're being offered on an OG basis, but I still think if consents to be granted, they need to be appropriately targeted.
Happy with that?
Yep.
And likewise, I guess 27 would also apply.
Yep. Yeah. Now, advice note 1, didn't understand what that meant. So to facilitate cultural interpretation mediums in relation to the Hako restoration and cultural offset. I don't understand that advice note, and how does it relate to the existing activities we've been asked to retrospectively consent?
It doesn't specifically relate to the existing activities. That was a recommendation that the applicant had agreed to work with Pirirako. And essentially the cultural interpretation mediums that are referenced there, as the applicants discussed, having Pou and those sorts of things with Pirirako. So it was really just a way of recognising that the applicant hadn't forgotten or didn't want to do those things, but rather than a condition of these existing activities consent, it was just an acknowledgement that really that's what it was, advice.
Right.
And that applies to all of those 3 advice notes.
Yeah. So would any of those actions that the advice notes address occur within the 24 months duration should this retrospective consent be granted?
It's certainly possible, yes, in my view, yes.
Right. So maybe just if you could reflect on, in light of that, whether the wording here is appropriate or if it can be refined. I know they're only advice notes, but if they can be refined, that's good. And if you think they're fine as they are, then that's also fine. So they're the questions I had about conditions. Obviously, we'll hear from the reporting team on their view on the questions I've asked, and you might give some thought to the issues I've raised, but it also would obviously be beneficial for yourself and Ms. Perrin to put your heads together on wording. So if there can be agreed wording to address those issues that can then be tabled as part of the reply, that's all well and good. So maybe you can talk to each other about that and see if you can come to a landing on that. And of course, just repeat what I said earlier for anyone who's just tuned in, and all of the questions I've been asking certainly don't mean that we've already decided consent should be granted. I'm just very always keen to understand how conditions will work and whether they're clear, certain and enforceable, because that's part of our decision-making framework. So no one who's listening should assume that we've made any decisions on whether or not to grant the consent. So James, any follow-up questions? at all at this stage, or any further questions?
I don't think I have any follow-up questions after following the kind of line of questioning that you received, especially in the consent conditions. So I might just wait till the Section 42A report, my office on some of that. I only have one remaining question after all of that. It's just, is there cell phone coverage out there? I guess it's in terms of...
As far as I'm aware, they are, Mr. Daniel? Yeah. Yes.
There is, okay.
All right, so Mr. Gardner-Hopkins and Mr. Daniel, that's, I think, the end of the questions we had for yourself and your witnesses. Is there anything you want to add at this stage?
No, look, I'm content to leave it there. It's obviously a few things to think about for the reply. But just also my thanks to the panel for the efficiency of the process to date.
No, you're very welcome. So from the reporting team, anything you wish to draw to our attention at this stage? And now, if it wasn't a question and you wanted to raise something, you can.
Yes, I will then. So just on the condition around the landscaping and the implementation plan, my understanding of what was the intent of that condition, which Mr. Mansur drafted. And
So just remind me, what number are we talking about?
Mr. Mansur is council's.
No, what number of conditions?
Oh, sorry. I think it was 11.
11, yep.
Yes. My understanding is the intention is that's to operate more as a landscape completion report. So perhaps that would be better wording than implementation.
Okay. So
Yeah.
it's like, yes, we've done all the mitigation that
Yes, so that
the
would be
conditions
confirmed.
require a report. All right, well,
That's
that's probably
nice.
helpful clarification, so you can feed that into your consideration, Ms. Crossan, and any discussions you have with Ms. Perrin. Now, anything else from anyone else in the team that you need to advise us of at this stage?
Just that, and for the reporting planner's presentation on, gosh, losing track, is it Wednesday? That legal counsel may appear and provide a written and verbal on the day.
Yep.
In response to Mr. James Gardner-Hopkins's representations.
Yep, and of
If
course I
that's
asked a couple
acceptable.
of questions about legal matters as well. Who is counsel for the council?
Cooney Lees Morgan, Rachel Zamey.
All right, now that would be helpful. And then, of course, Mr. Gardner-Hopkins, in your reply, you'd obviously be welcome to respond to anything that the officers raise. All right, well, that brings us to the end of proceedings for the day. We'll now adjourn, and we're doing a site visit in the morning, and we'll reconvene the hearing at 1 p.m. tomorrow afternoon. And I think, James, our practice is to do a karakia, not so much now, but at the end of the hearing on Thursday. Is that your preference? Okay, so we won't have a closing karakia, opening and closing every day. We'll do a closing karakia at the end of the hearing, be it Wednesday or Thursday, whenever that occurs. So thanks very much, everyone. Enjoy the rest of your day, and we'll see you if you're interested